What documentary was proven to be full of crap? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I am starting to have my doubts about this Blair Witch. Okay, on a serious note, Nanook of the North really kind of kicked off the documentary movement as we know it today, and was full of many staged scenarios and false facts. Still an important and interesting film, but it shows how long this issue has persisted in documentary form. At the very least, Robert J. Flaherty was pretty open about his embellishments compared to some of the folks listed in the comments. Story 2. Several months ago, we watched a random Tubi thing called Bigfoot vs. Yeti for a laugh. A stupid thing about who would win. The problem is that I think one or two people at the beginning acknowledged they were fictional creatures, but every other single interviewed people presented their opinion as if it was fact. Things like, we know that the Bigfoot is sensitive to sound. We do? How? When? I didn't go into watching it with high expectations, but I was still disappointed at how it was presented as since when it was made up nonsense opinions. For 90 minutes. I guess this is no different from a lot of paranormal and alien content. Half these documentaries need to have big disclaimers running through the whole feature because what they're saying is stuff from their imagination. Maybe I'm not desensitized enough and dislike things being presented as news/fact when they're not. Story 3. The whole ancient aliens thing on the History Channel was lies shoveled on top of misinformation, shoveled on top of academic mistakes that had long been corrected before the show, but the people who liked the narrative chose to keep using as fact. None of it was true. Every single point they ever made in favor of ancient aliens existing has been thoroughly debunked. Story 4. Alien autopsy. While they never proved it to be real, they heavily implied it. One thing they did was show the video to special effects artists who said they couldn't recreate that amount of detail of the alien's inner organs. Turns out the guy who faked it just used pig organs. Story 5. Super Size Me tries to make out McDonald's is entirely to blame for his health issues. A doctor even says something along the lines of, "You've got the liver of an alcoholic," and he claims to not drink, so it must be the food doing it, only for it to come out years later that he was in fact an alcoholic. There's quite a lot else wrong with that documentary that makes it very biased, but that was always the bit that stuck with me. Story 6. The Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge. UCLA anthropology student travels to Mexico to study psychedelics. Meets a native medicine man and becomes his apprentice. This was during the 60s or 70s Chicano movement, and connection to native ancestry was really popular. See also Sachin Littlefeather. As was experimenting with psychedelics. The book was a popular success, and the author put out a few sequels. All of it was BS. Made it all up. Story 7. Blackfish. If even half of what they said was true, then the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, National Wildlife Rehabilitation Network, and Jack Hanna all would have pulled their support from the parks. Plus, the people who made Blackfish had sat on it until the park had gone public on the stock market to tank their new stock and used the proceeds from their documentary to open their own aquatic theme park with orcas on display and open sea pens. Which one of their biggest financial backers basically said that there was no evidence their approach was better, and if they had known this was their intent, then they never would have invested because they thought that at least SeaWorld knew how to properly care for their animals. Story 8. Peter Jackson's first film, Forgotten Silver, was presented as a documentary but was later revealed to be a hoax in the same vein as Best in Show or This Is Spinal Tap, except that it played it straight. I will definitely recommend watching it nonetheless, and I will definitely recommend not telling anyone you watch it with that it's a hoax. It is not revealed at any point during the film. The story in this film is about forgotten New Zealand filmmaker Colin McKenzie, who wanted to make films in a time when filmmaking involved literally making the film stock and cameras from scratch. It's a super fun story, especially if you don't know it's a hoax going in, which is why you shouldn't mention it to anyone you watch it with until after. Story 9. Behind the Curve. It is not the documentary itself that is bogus, but the claims that the subjects of the documentary, the flat earthers, have parroted throughout the film. What is funny is they proved their claims to be full of crap by setting up a $20,000 experiment intended to irrefutably prove the flat Earth concept, which backfired, of course, while the cameras were rolling. Story 10. The documentary about Megalodon being real. The documentary about mermaids being real, Catch the German Fisherman That Doesn't Speak German. There was a similar one about dragons, but that one doesn't count MO because they clearly say in the beginning that it's not real. Supersize Me, the problem wasn't so much McDonald's as it was the protagonist's drug abuse. Anything Ancient Aliens related. Story 11. Waiting for Superman was hailed as an important look into the ways that schools are funded in America and how the funding process is tied to their success. In the end, used cherry-picked information and emotional appeals to justify voucher programs and charter schools, which then massively helped misinform the public about their school systems and gave rise to people like Betsy DeVos. These talking points were around in conservative think tanks for generations, but this documentary popularized the ideas amongst liberals, making them mainstream just long enough to take root and help decimate the public school system in vast swaths of the country. It was Davis Guggenheim's follow-up to An Inconvenient Truth. The vast majority of studies have shown all this film's points to be nonsense. But the PR it did, at the exact time it did it, was a great benefit to DeVos and her ilk. Story 12. What the bleep do we know? As far as entertainment purposes, it's actually solid. The visual effects were pretty good for its time, kind of trippy. 10 out of 10 worth popping an edible and watching. But the science was rather askew. They tried to make quantum mechanics into the new agey self-help kind of thing. Energies work on the quantum level, so if you think bad thoughts, your houseplants will die, or if you yell at water, it won't be as good for you when you drink it type deal. Ick. I'm pretty sure at the root. It's legit, they just stretched it quite a bit, lol. Story 13. I remember watching something about polar bears starving and being miserable because of us humans. Maybe it was on Netflix? Anyway, I was deeply impacted by it. Then, while obsessing about the poor bears on the internet, I YouTube-holed my way to a video of that obliterated the depressing documentary, very badly obliterated it, and exposed it for blatant propaganda and, in short, a big lie. It was a mind-blowing realization, and I was a bit mind-FD about how the one and only scientist/specialist who knew what she was talking about was silenced and mistreated, and put off the project for not going along with the BS story. It was some years back, all this. But I was a bit shocked to have such a shameless work of absolute deception and mass manipulation exposed so thoroughly. Story 14. Just watched the Netflix 3-part docuseries on the Zodiac. It focused entirely on Arthur Lee Allen and does all it can to paint him as the Zodiac without bringing up any of the other suspects. It extensively interviews Robert Graysmith, who wrote a book that was used as the basis for the movie. Heavily slanted in one direction, excluding important information. Story 15. I think this is close enough. Just recently, I was watching Monster Quest. So far, I believe most of the stories as I'm watching them, etc. But they did a Bigfoot episode and they included the Patterson film and interviewed some guy about it. That film is fake. I forget when/where etc. it was found to be fake, and maybe the episode predates when it was found out to be fake. But I was pretty disappointed to be watching that episode and seeing them trying to copy how it looks in the film and saying they couldn't copy exactly how it looked, implying that it was probably real. And even more disappointing to see them interview the guy talking about it as if it really happened. What's an open secret that doesn't have a documentary about it yet? Story 1. I'd love to see a documentary on the PPP loan fraud during COVID, US. There have been a lot of news articles about it, but a deep dive that exposes wealthy people would be awesome. And the fraud website should be reopened, and people who turn others and that result in a true fraud case should get a reward. There were so many fraud cases in my county I reported and nothing ever happened. One guy owned a few convenience stores with probably no more than 4 or 5 employees in each and got forgiven for millions of dollars. Story 2. There's an industry that basically takes guardianship of elderly people by getting them declared incompetent without their knowledge. They move them into nursing homes, sell off their homes and assets, and take over their money. It's like the title theft scam, but with people being taken over rather than just real estate. It's brutal and frightening. Story 3. The province of New Brunswick, Canada, is basically the play toy of a small handful of wealthy families, Irving, McCain, Holland. The government is just there for show. The Irvings are bad people. The government of New Brunswick, party doesn't matter, are bad people who live in the pockets of the Irvings. They want us dead. They're poisoning our water and food. A close friend's parent has this mystery brain disease, and her blood is filled with everything the Irving and government sprays on our woodlands. Story 4. Would like to see a doc made on the Shenyun dance cult. I went to a performance a while back. Had no clue what I was getting into. Absolutely gorgeous dancing, spectacular music, amazing customers, and the whole 9 yards. The religion/cult part was not subtle. Not even remotely subtle. I'm actually sad about it. The culty bits turned me off to the point where I will not go again, but their talent and skill in choreography, costumes, and everything was extremely legit. Truly S tier. Story 5. Tiger King kind of covered it, but some states have really lax exotic animal laws. Lions, tigers, and bears are not pets. They are wild animals. Tiger King actually led to positive change on this. It brought awareness, leading Congress to pass the Big Cat Bill in 2022. It bans private ownership of these big cats, with exceptions for zoos and rehab sanctuaries. Story 6. The way old folks are treated in care homes. There is a lot that could be exposed about elder and end-of-life issues. Making the enormous monthly cost of a nursing home, $10,000 for a shared room or assisted living, greater than $6,000, known and what those places are really like to live in. The estate planning industry that popped up in the US to help people hide assets from the government so that Medicaid will pay but not take the house. The push to integrate mentally ill seniors with the rest of the population and the impact that has on the other residents. Seniors avoiding marriage to keep old pensions, etc. The entire hospice industry and how they aren't going to be there to help at all unless there is an emergency. I could go on. Story 7. How the private prison industry basically got tons of local sheriff's departments into the prison industry, especially in the South, by financing, building, and training them to run jails and prisons for profit. It's like a franchise, and poor people are the product. Story 8. Steroid use in Hollywood. Everyone knows it's happening, but I don't think the extent is widely known. When a male actor puts on a lot of muscle for a role, they have most likely used steroids. Even if they have just put on a little muscle, they probably still used steroids, because you can't gain fast enough to get in shape for the start of filming. And because it is technically illegal, no one will ever admit it. What makes it worse is these people, and their trainers, will write articles for Men's Health where they go through their workouts, ignoring the fact that they took growth hormone for a year. There have been a few good documentaries about doping in sports, but I think we need one about Hollywood. Story 9. The Fat Boys were pioneers of hip-hop and contributed greatly to the genre, but are largely written off as a novelty and have mostly been forgotten. I would love to do a documentary about them. Love the fact that every other comment in this thread is like the Coca-Cola Corporation controls this northern Canadian town using evil Mormon wizards on their payroll who shoot steroids into their balls and use child labor to put microplastics into your food that's cooked by Nazis, and meanwhile you're like, hey, these guys made big contributions to rap and I think they should be appreciated more. Story 10. How much the military actually wasted. If they don't use what they're allotted one fiscal year, they don't get the same the next, so towards the end of the year they'll throw ammo off boats in the ocean and purposely break office furniture and burn excess uniforms. So the same amount at minimum is allotted the next year. Story 11. The Mormon Church is sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in stock and real estate. They do almost no charity work directly from those funds. The majority of the humanitarian funds the church claims are from an equivalent dollar value of labor from their members and another entirely separate charity arm which doesn't involve church contributions. Story 12. The age of all of the tech that is the backbone of our whole world. What you as the consumer or any frontline employee is interacting with is usually just a GUI overlay or a program that is manipulating something much, much older. The worst tend to be the government, certain sectors in aviation and transit and banking. Also, people don't know that one company that completely flies under the radar and has no real oversight owns a very large portion of the software and has their fingers in a huge amount of financial and retail transactions. Story 13. There was a man who scammed a bunch of American small businesses, my dad's business included, to cook their books and amass a bunch of wealth in order to purchase an army of African soldiers and attempt to purchase Russian missiles in order to try and take over the world. He went undetected for a long time. Absolutely wild story. There's a small podcast that talks about it, but it deserves a Netflix series. This guy was at my house when I was a kid, LOL. Story 14. The way doctors are made in the US is basically a form of indentured servitude if you aren't from a rich family. You have to obey a system that is using you for massive profits. And if you wipe out or get dismissed at any point, you have $250,000-500K in debt to punish you / make you reconsider your decision to leave. Some experiences of residency include low pay, 6-day work weeks, forced night shifts, and having little to no say about your schedule. The last one isn't exactly limited to residency though. Story 15. The DEA is artificially restricting production of ingredients used to make ADHD medications, just as record numbers of people, especially middle-aged women, are being diagnosed after years of being ignored. This is causing a shortage that has been going on for more than 2 years with no sign of letting up. Patients are forced to call multiple pharmacies every 30 days to track down who might have a supply. And they are often treated like junkies due to the restrictions around these meds being controlled substances. It's insane. What documentary is a must-see? Story 1. The 7-Up documentaries are amazing. Each film in the series interviews the same group of British people. It starts when they are 7 years old, and there is a new film put out every 7 years. The most recent one released, the participants are 63 years old. Binging these movies is an unbelievable experience. Incredible series. Utterly fascinating. Although I keep hearing Tony's exasperated teacher snapping, don't let me tell you again. It's now an earworm. Story 2. The Fog of War, 11 Lessons from the Life of Robert S. McNamara. One quote from the movie by McNamara about his own actions in World War II. The frankness of McNamara's commentary was astonishing. I have never been able to fully understood how I feel about it. McNamara had a complete understanding of his actions and of those around him. He knew it was wrong, morally and criminally. He also seemed utterly indifferent to that. Great documentary. Story 3. Hot coffee. It's important to watch for a number of reasons. It's about the story everyone knows about, the case that was used as propaganda to persuade the average American citizen that limiting their own rights by supporting tort reform was important, so sad megacorporations wouldn't have to waste their time dealing with the people that they wronged. Story 4. The only documentary that has ever entirely changed my mind on a subject is Blackfish. And I'm not the only one, because this documentary changed the world and changed the way an entire industry operates. It got rid of certain theme parks, and aquariums operate in an entirely different way. They used to have dolphin shows. Now it's entirely rescue dolphins, and they don't do shows. It's all educational. If you haven't seen Blackfish, it's worth a watch. If for nothing else, to see how it used to be. Nowadays, most younger people already had this mindset. But it took this documentary to change us older people's mindset. Story 5. The Alpinist. Yeah, all those recent mountain climbing movies are fantastic. Alpinist, The Dawn Wall, Meru, Free Solo. The Real Rock series is also fantastic, and a shorter format with equally amazing footage and stories. This one is amazing. To see that guy doing that crazy stuff. The first time ever climbing a mountain blew my mind. I didn't think anyone on this planet tried stuff like that. Story 6. Finders Keepers. This man bids for an abandoned storage unit and wins. What he doesn't expect to find is a barbecue with an embalmed leg in it. He sets the barbecue and leg up as a sideshow attraction at his house. Until the owner of the leg finds out. What ensues is a really interesting legal fight. Who legally owns the leg? Absolutely worth your time. Story 7. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. There was so much normal life despite the war and Holocaust, it was too easy for regular people to ignore the horrors. The rise was so slow and insidious, by the time people realized how bad things were, it was too late. Keep sweet, pray, and obey. This is a fairly recent one covering FLDS and religious splinter groups that abused women and children for decades with the full cooperation of the authorities. Runners-up: Jimmy Savile, The British Horror Story. Again, it was too easy for a predator to harm kids right in the open. The Keepers. It's a deep dive into the power and influence of the Catholic Church in Baltimore. For something shorter and lighter, The Movies That Made Us. Fun facts and the process of how a lot of great films were made. Story 8. Gray Matter. In the spring of 2002, acclaimed filmmaker Joe Berlinger, Brothers Keeper, Paradise Lost, Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, traveled to Vienna to witness the burial of the preserved brains of over 700 handicapped children. The victims had been murdered in a euthanasia clinic as part of a Nazi eugenics program that many consider the opening act of the Holocaust. Story 9. History Channel series The Men Who Built America, 2012. It covers Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Thomas Edison, George Westinghouse, Henry Ford, and others. This was back in the day when big money could buy politicians and their decisions. Sound familiar? From Rockefeller snatching up land for railroad lines whether the owners wanted to sell or not, to Standard Oil becoming a monopoly and dumping waste products from kerosene manufacture into the river. It not only covers the accomplishments of these men, but their unethical and sometimes illegal means. Edison wanted DC power to be the standard. He was up against Westinghouse and Tesla with AC, so he electrocuted an elephant as a publicity stunt. It cost Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan a fortune to get McKinley elected president. Shame he was assassinated. They lost a bundle. Story 10. A must-see is Blackfish, 2013. This documentary examines the treatment of killer whales in captivity, specifically focusing on Tilikum, a whale responsible for the deaths of 3 people while in captivity. The film explores the ethical implications of keeping these highly intelligent and social creatures in captivity for human entertainment, and sparked a national conversation about animal welfare and the treatment of animals in captivity. Blackfish is a powerful and thought-provoking documentary that has had a significant impact on public opinion and the treatment of captive animals. Story 11. Fathead. Currently on YouTube in its entirety. Everyone know the movie Supersize Me, where a guy eats nothing but supersized McDonald's and gains a bunch of weight and becomes horrifically unhealthy. But more than a handful of people said things to quite add up when you actually look at them. So a guy named Tom Naughton made a counter-documentary, Fathead, which points out the many flaws in Supersize Me, and even going through the same experiment of eating nothing but McDonald's. Basically, it boils down to that the guy in Supersize Me may have eaten way more than he showed on camera and purposely did everything he could to become as unhealthy as possible, because he was under the belief that by doing so he would get people to eat more healthy, and thus he was doing the world a favor. I think it's a good documentary simply for the fact that it showcases that the majority of society can easily be misled, and while it did end with a net good of people eating healthier, it does showcase the potential of a malicious actor. Story 12. Fire, the greatest party that never happened. Just sit back and behold the hubris and inevitable train wreck. On Netflix, We Are X, the story of X Japan, the first visual K band. If you're into Japanese pop culture of any kind, it's worth checking out. Prime Video. There's one documentary I'm very interested in seeing and haven't been able to find. Television event about the making of the 80s nuke drama The Day After and the panic it caused when it aired. If anyone knows where it's streaming, I'd be interested to know. Story 13. The Thin Blue Line tells the story of a man in Texas convicted of something he did not do. They recreate all of the witness testimony on film, first based on what they claimed they saw, and then what they would have seen based on weather conditions. The psychologist who is the state's expert witness is truly scary. I saw it when it first came out and have never forgotten just how bad the legal system is. Story 14. Tickled is this documentary that starts off looking like it's about the world of competitive tickling. But then things start to get weird and dark, and the filmmakers end up uncovering some crazy stuff. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say it's not your typical documentary. Story 15. I have actually 2 recommendations. The first one is Explained, which is a documentary series that dedicates every episode to a different topic, such as the global water crisis, the intelligence of animals, tattoos, programming, the human flesh, etc., and explains it in simple terms with helpful visualizations. The second recommendation I would only recommend to these who are mentally stable, because The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez tells the very sad story of named boy who was extremely abused by his mother and her boyfriend, which lead to him dying. It's a very good documentary, but it's also very horrific and lets you doubt in the youth welfare office. I say it again, only watch this if you feel ready to handle it. It shocked and depressed me extremely. What is the most chilling documentary you have ever watched? Story 1. Crocodile Gennady, which has been renamed Almost Holy since I watched it. It's about a Ukrainian pastor who collects street children who are in basically the worst possible condition, full-blown alcoholics by age 5, disease-riddled from using dirty needles by age 7, living in the sewers, etc., and brings them to his orphanage, which he cannot get state funding for because of the vigilante nature of his operation. He often takes the children against their will, beats the piss out of dealers who are selling to them, etc. This crap is 100% real and makes the kids in Slumdog Millionaire look privileged. And the turns it takes during filming are really crazy. Be prepared emotionally. Story 2. Too late, but still, no one has mentioned it. Definitely Children Underground. In Romania, decades after they outlawed abortion and contraception, there are thousands of homeless children living alone in the subways. They are essentially feral children, and most of those in the film are addicted to huffing paint. It's terribly depressing and truly chilling to think about what happens when abortions become illegal. Story 3. Into Eternity. It's about the long-term nuclear waste repository in Finland designed to safely store nuclear waste until it decays and becomes safe, a process that takes 100,000 years. They don't even know what sign to put on the door to tell people to keep out, because they can't say how language will evolve over the next 100,000 years. 100,000 years in the past puts us in the Middle Paleolithic period. Imagine Neolithic man trying to give you a warning. Story 4. The Woman Who Wasn't There. It's about a woman who claimed that she was in one of the Twin Towers on September 11th, above the impact. She has this incredible story of survival and lost love. Turns out she made it all up. It's gripping. I saw that documentary and it turned my stomach. The fact that some people didn't hate her after her secret was revealed was unfathomable to me. They are better people than I could ever be. Story 5. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. If you're going to watch this, please do not look up the timeline of events beforehand. Just like most documentaries, it is definitely worth experiencing the roller coaster of emotion by yourself. Also watch this with some friends you've never seen cry. They may. This movie is the hardest I have ever cried over a film. Even ones about Rwanda and the Holocaust didn't get me quite like this one, probably because it was so intimately personable with the family involved. Story 6. Out of the Clear Blue Sky. I think it's on Netflix. It's about the losses faced by Cantor Fitzgerald after September 11th. They were all above the floors of impact, and none of the employees who were there during the attacks survived. They lost about 600 people IRC, and how the company had to scramble to stay afloat afterward. It also shows the CEO's perspective on some of the actions he had to take afterward, e.g. removing those declared missing after September 11th from the payroll after a while, to keep the company afloat for the survivors and their families and the families of the deceased. Really touching story. 7 Days in September is also a good 9/11 documentary. Story 7. Children of the Grave. It was a director who went to a haunted site, originally to film an indie horror movie, a cheesy B1, at that. I enjoyed it, but while he was there so many weird things happened that he filmed a documentary about 2 of the places he was filming the other movie at. Assuming he didn't fake it all, and he may have, it was one of the more convincing ghosts or real documentaries out there. Story 8. Blackfish. I know it's biased, and I know that there are faults with it, but I loved going to Shamu shows when I was a little kid. I was just so amazed by his size, his grace, etc. To find out his story, and to know all the mental pain he had to go through, while realizing just how much he felt that pain, and how it affected his livelihood, it just really makes me distraught. Story 9. The Cove. I was disturbed. I can't believe I had to go this far to find it. Holy cow, was that a rough one. The sounds they made, the red water, the young being shipped out to movie studios/water attraction. They are selling the meat, high in mercury, and the health problems people face. Story 10. The Crash Reel. Went into it knowing nothing and figured I'd be bored watching something about snowboarding. Was completely wrong, such good documentary making. Acquired brain injuries are chilling. Helmets are important when doing fun crap. This film ended up being an incredibly inspiring and uplifting story too. Story 11. The Last Days of Peter Bergman. In 2009, a gray-haired man arrived by bus in the seaport town of Sligo in Ireland. Under the name Peter Bergman, he checked into a hotel and carried 3 large pieces of luggage to his room. Over the next 3 days, he was captured by closed-circuit security cameras, leaving the hotel with a full plastic bag and returning to his room with nothing. On the 4th day, he went to the nearby seaside village of Ross's Point, where he would later wash up on the shore. No one has been able to identify this guy. His name was fake. They've never been able to track him to family, and no one's ever come looking for him. It's bizarre. Why would he just drop off the face of the earth like that? Clearly trying to hide his identity. Story 12. The TV documentary about the school shooting I was caught in, where my old classmate got shot once but left 6 holes as the bullet traveled through one arm, into his chest, bounced off his sternum, out his chest and through the other arm. The documentary was not shot at the college the shooting happened in, but they managed to have camera angles which were very reminiscent of the atrium. I was tense and possibly catatonic during the hour, then broke down crying when they showed the police officer taking out the shooter. Writing this, my eyes are wet and my lip is quivering. I believe this will be the 10-year anniversary in September. Story 13. Undercover in North Korea. Secretly filmed documentary by a journalist posing as a DR's assistant with a group of eye doctors allowed into the country to charitably treat cataracts. Terrifying. When people make jokes about North Korea, I don't think they fully understand what they're joking about. Story 14. Deliver Us from Evil. It's about a Catholic priest child molester in the 1970s. The part where I always sob uncontrollably is hearing the parents of one of the victims talking about it, and the dad is saying when they finally found out about everything, he asks his daughter, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her response is, because he always said if anyone ever hurt her he would kill them, and she didn't want him to go to jail. The poor man just bursts into tears talking about it. And I'm about to just thinking about it. Story 15. The Imposter, 2012. Mainly because we were sitting in the house that the boy disappeared from when we were watching it. It was the night before we were moving out and our neighbors had told us. FYI, they never filled in the holes they dug up in the backyard looking for the kid's body. The whole time we lived there we just thought they had meant to plant trees, but moved out before they got around to it. House can be seen about 10 minutes from the end. Red brick with white trim. What is a documentary that blew your mind? Story 1. The fog of war took me by surprise. I didn't know much about the Cuban Missile Crisis beforehand, but I learned a lot about how close we came to an all-out nuclear war. There's a ton of other details from that era as well that really surprised me. The firebombing of Japan before we dropped the nukes. So many facts in there I never knew. Also, McNamara is viewed historically by my parents, who hated Nixon and LBJ, as being this evil mastermind pulling all the strings, think Dick Cheney-like. This doc made him seem like more the level-headed one in the room more often than not, with recordings to support it. Story 2. Ken Burns' The Vietnam War. It should be seen in every history classroom in the U.S. One of the most comprehensive and horrifying documentaries I've ever seen. Soldiers on both sides, diplomats, spies, and citizens who were caught in the middle all share their experiences and perspectives. U.S. education doesn't come close to painting a clear picture of the war. What a tragic waste of life. That era was so monstrously messed up that anyone who watches it will think, today isn't so bad. As the New York Times put it, the documentary will break your heart and win your mind. Story 3. My Octopus Teacher on Netflix. I knew that the octopus are pretty smart, but the documentary took it to another level. The documentary was based on this guy who went diving every day for 300+ days to befriend an octopus and earn her trust. He recorded the octopus playing with fishes, develop hunting strategies, etc. The octopus even wanted scritches from him. Amazing cinematography too. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Story 4. Abducted in Plain Sight and Capturing the Freedmans. It really blew my mind while I was watching those insane family dynamics. The stupid decisions and the way they justify, deny, or try to normalize such insane behavior. I still wonder how on earth they managed to get everyone involved to talk about it on camera. Story 5. The Social Dilemma. Besides Reddit, because I only follow a few subs, I deleted every social app off of my phone after watching The Social Dilemma. I had recently been questioning a lot about everyday life and was beginning to notice my obsession with scrolling past things I don't care about for hours on end. This film is very unsettling and will make you question what your value as an individual is. Side note. Even after I deleted the apps, my phone has been sending me social updates through Chrome or Samsung Internet, which eerily reminds me of the scene with the 3 men pulling the teenager back into his phone. Story 6. Jiro dreams of sushi. I always thought making sushi was kind of a lazy art because it's really just a rice ball and uncooked fish. But it was awesome to see someone who put so much dedication to the art and seeing that sushi is quite a complex art if you do it right. It made me really appreciate those who specialize in any field. Highly recommend this one. Story 7. Many, but most recently American Death Case, The Family Next Door. I remember reading about it in 2018, so I knew the outcome, who act whom, but I had no knowledge of the details. I've met pathological liars in my lifetime, yet it still blows my mind, to answer the question, that people truly think they can get away with blatant and obvious lies. It's laughable when act isn't on the table. The documentary was well edited using pre-recorded data, so it felt more chilling to me. Story 8. Anything by Werner Herzog, but specifically Grizzly Man. A very sad and strange and unbelievable account of a man who lived in the wilderness among grizzly bears. Some documentarians would romanticize the situation, but Herzog's blunt and completely unromantic commentary makes it amazing. Story 9. Just last night, I watched David Attenborough's newest film, A Life on Our Planet. Attenborough calls or his witness statement in which he shares his concerns regarding climate change and describes his personal experiences seeing the destruction of our planet over his 90 years. It was a fantastic documentary, and I would very much recommend it. He is one of my favorite people. I had a hard time watching it because you could see the sadness and disappointment in his eyes. I definitely had tears most of the way through. It was so eye-opening and so unsettling for me, but so beautiful at the same time. I have recommended it to everyone. I have always taken steps to reduce my footprint, but I'm going to encourage others and push myself to be even better because of his words. Story 10. A BBC documentary called The Death of Yugoslavia. It's on YouTube. I'm European and I constantly hear politicians and pundits talk about how the Western world is the epitome of peace and democracy. It was eye-opening for me to see this 6-part series depicting in excruciating detail the horrors that happened on the European continent less than 30 years ago. Give it a watch, it's really good. Be warned, there is a lot of brutal original footage though. Story 11. Compliance. I actually watched the film dramatization first, not knowing it was based on reality, and spent the film complaining it was ridiculous and far-fetched. No one could be that stupid. A whole restaurant staff, all this moronic? No, it's too much. Then I found there was a documentary and watched that. If anything, the real people were even more dribbling cretinous than the film made them seem. Amazed me. Story 12. Jesus Camp is a contentious documentary with incendiary opinions on charismatic ministries and evangelical proselytizing, but it's a disconcerting revelation on religious indoctrination during our formative years. The conviction which the children speak is distinctively adult in vehemence and diction. They're intoxicated with the exalted position religion affords the righteous, which is a pernicious precedent to entrench in a child. This is one of my favorite docs because it's just so bonkers. The camp leader is bonkers, those parents are bonkers. These kids believe they are thinking for themselves when they're absolutely not. Story 13. Zeitgeist. Honestly, I watched that when I was young, maybe 13 to 14, and if I was to watch it today, I'd probably think it was some conspiracy theory Bible of sorts, and I doubt that I'd be as blown away by it now. But I credit that documentary to me not believing in religion or in a God anymore. I wonder whether I ever would have come to the same conclusion without ever watching it now that I think about it. I remember watching that, and it's pretty easy to get carried away with it when you're young. But looking at it realistically, it quickly falls apart. Story 14. Not so much a documentary, but a video on YouTube that shows what happens to the universe in the far future. I always thought that things would be destroyed and created, and that would just repeat and go on forever. This video shows how, after an unimaginable amount of time, everything just stops. After watching it, it changed how I thought about the subject. If anyone is interested, it's Time Lapse of the Future, a journey to the end of time. We start in 2019 and travel exponentially through time, witnessing the future of Earth, the death of the sun, the end of all stars, proton decay, zombie galaxies, possible future civilizations, exploding black holes, the effects of dark energy, alternate universes, the final fate of the cosmos. Story 15. The Devil Next Door. Netflix. It shows how little we know our neighbors and how someone can seem like the nicest person but might have done some horrific things before you knew them. It also calls into question if the crimes committed in the Second World War can ever be too far in the past for people to not want justice, and if putting 90-plus-year-old men on trial will achieve anything really. What documentary would you rate a 10 out of 10? Story 1. Endurance. The failed Antarctic expedition of Ernest Shackleton. His ship was trapped in the ice, and he and his crew made their way by small boats to an island. With no hope for recovery, Shackleton then traveled over 600 miles in a Southern Ocean hurricane to a whaling station. Story 2. Man on Wire by James Marsh. It's about the guy who walked on a high wire strung between the Twin Towers in 1974. It goes back and forth between real footage and reenactments of the event, making it a surprisingly tense documentary. Never thought I would give a shit about a guy like that, but the prep that went into pulling that off and the event itself was super fascinating. Story 3. I Know That Voice. It's a documentary about voice acting produced by John DiMaggio, Bender, and Jake the Dog, featuring interviews with a ton of the most ubiquitous voice actors in the industry. These include Billy West, Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, Tara Strong, Kevin Michael Richardson, D. Bradley Baker, Phil Lamar, and many more. It's also pretty funny. Story 4. Enron, Smartest Guys in the Room. Enron was an energy company which used various lies and fraud to convince Wall Street it was great and pump its company stock up, all while secretly having failing business ventures. This doc is great, and I find myself watching it at least once a week. It's available on Netflix and Hulu. O.J. Made in America. This documentary is 7 hours long, and the first time I watched it, it was on a lazy Saturday and I watched the whole thing. It was that enthralling. The doc follows the life of O.J. Simpson through him getting to be famous to his infamous trial for double act and the aftermath. It's available on ESPN's website. Story 5. Betting on Zero. It's a documentary following people who have been screwed over by Herbalife trying to get their money back and highlight how much Herbalife and other multi-level marketing businesses prey on vulnerable people. Bill Ackman's attempt to short Herbalife stock is intertwined with the story. It's supposed to be the main focus, but the former Herbalife distributors are more interesting. If you're interested in multi-level marketing or know someone who is involved in one, it's worth a watch. Story 6. Dear Zachary, I watched this without having any prior knowledge of what it was about, and while I do agree it was sad, I definitely felt like the style of the documentary was trying to artificially increase the sadness. It was kind of like that friend who shows you a comedy and keeps poking you in the ribs, saying, "Isn't it funny? It's super funny, isn't it?" Only with sadness. Maybe I'm partially desensitized to it, but the twist, if you can call it that, didn't really do much to make me feel any worse about the situation. Though again, I feel like that was because the narrator kept trying to impress upon me how sad everything was. Story 7. 13th blew my mind. The American prison system is in shambles. It's eye-opening and enraging and audacious. Should be required viewing for high school-aged kids to help them understand the ways our society has been manipulated to make them accept the systematic oppression of an entire race and more. It's so important, I can't recommend it enough. That was horrifying and made so much worse when I see all these posts about legalized weed and white people using it, and I think of all the black people in prison for marijuana drug convictions. Story 8. Control plus F Dark States. More people need to learn about Louis Theroux's Dark States documentary series. It's a series of documentaries about systemic issues plaguing the U.S., and it's fascinating. Episode 1 was about the heroin epidemic and features Louis talking to several addicts, dealers, families of addicts, and EMTs to understand the different sides of the issue. Story 9. Amy. Amy Winehouse was a badass. I remember watching it at the BAM Theater in Brooklyn with my then-girlfriend, who was a fan of Amy Winehouse. Me, less so, but I went because it was a date. Like halfway through the movie, I was so caught up in the story, I was resisting the urge to get up and yell, "For God's sake, intervene." In the theater, to her friends and family on the screen, as you see this talented and healthy singer just get whittled away by drug and alcohol abuse and pressures from fame. Story 10. Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I watch this all the time because the filmmaker, Werner Herzog, has the most beautiful and soothing voice I've ever heard. And the content is so intriguing. It is about a cave system in France that has the oldest human drawings ever discovered. Learning about what their life was like is seriously so fascinating. I get chills when I watch it. Story 11. James Willems and Lawrence Santa's wrestling documentary on Rooster Teeth. James had a dream of becoming a wrestler that didn't pan out, due to him have skills in other areas. Lawrence Sontag, a good friend, partnered up with James to help him achieve his dream. Lawrence in his youth was morbidly obese. He aims to kill two birds with one stone by helping his friends and gaining confidence. Story 12. The Four Falls of Buffalo. Tells the story of the Buffalo Bills losing 4 Super Bowls in a row and all the crazy unlikely things that went wrong every time to keep them from winning. Pretty heartbreaking stuff for the players and the fan base. Add in the storyline of Jim Kelly's battle with cancer and you've got one of the best sports stories in history. Story 13. ESPN's 30 for 30 documentary on the Hillsborough disaster. A fantastic 2-hour documentary from 2014 which goes through in detail what occurred that day on April 15, 1989, where 96 Liverpool fans died in a crush. It also details the cover-up by the South Yorkshire Police, who blamed Liverpool fans for the deaths and the subsequent campaigning by the victims' families for justice. Highly recommended even if you are not a football fan. Story 14. How come nobody has mentioned Inside Job? It is by far a very clear explanation of the cause behind the economic crisis in 2007-2009. It's really crazy that they gave it the Oscar Academy Award in 2010 or 11. Not being mentioned here makes me think that the USA society is still highly ignorant about how their elite operates and how easy it is for them to keep it going. It's the Russians. Story 15. When We Were Kings. I don't care anything about boxing, but this movie is about so much more than boxing. It's focused on the first match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the former Zaire, called The Rumble in the Jungle, back when Foreman was a really scary dude. There's a sort of thematic reflection on race in America as you watch Ali react to his first visit to Africa and interacting with African people. There's the aging but still cocky Ali facing off against the powerful, brutal young boxer in his prime, Foreman, of course. The story has a lot of drama and tension. What's the most frightening documentary you have seen? Story 1. Anything related to Jonestown. Granted, I am oddly fascinated by the psychology of mass suicide and how the personality of one corrupt person can be plenty detrimental. But seeing the footage from Jonestown makes me very uncomfortable. It bothers me because there could be so many more Jim Jones in the making easily. Story 2. The New Mexico prison riots, about a prisoner takeover of part of a NM state penitentiary in 1980. Some of the interviews are haunting. Once the prisoners took over, they gained access to the segregated inmate wing. One of the former guards talks about witnessing a man being tortured. It also included interviews with former prisoners who took part in the violence. Very morbid stuff, but fascinating as well. It's frightening what humans sometimes do to each other. Story 3. Nudity Brouillard, Night and Fog. You're in 9th grade, your history teacher had you read some texts from Arendt, then one day he grade you in class with a TV and say that everyone that want to leave at any moment can and even should, which is basically never done. Night and Fog was made 10 years after the liberation of Nazi concentration camps. The documentary features the abandoned grounds of Auschwitz and Majdanek while describing the lives of prisoners in the camps. Story 4. Children of the Secret State. It's about how famine and misallocation of resources forces many orphan children to eke out an existence where starvation and mistreatment is the norm. The documentary was filmed entirely in clandestine, with some shots being shot through covert cameras hidden in coats and shirts. It was the first documentary that really showed me how terrible things are for people in North Korea. I mean, you hear stories and news and all, but to see it, it hits you. Story 5. It's a Girl, about the feticide that happens in China, India, and elsewhere. Baby girls are passed away, their mothers assaulted, abused, all for being female and not male. Couldn't make it all the way through, too many feels, and I watched Blackfish beginning to end. I did cry a little, it's pretty rough. Story 6. The Corporation. I think the scariest part was the, I believe, Florida news team that got bullied into entirely changing their report on Monsanto simply because the company said to. They were later fired and tried to sue, citing whistleblower protection, but found out that it is not in fact illegal to misreport information on the news. Scary crap. Story 7. The Ambassador. This one wasn't inducing as much as it just made me sad about the state of affairs in the world. It followed a Danish journalist who bought a Liberian diplomatic position to the Central African Republic and essentially walked through the process of procuring and exporting illegal blood diamonds. Corruption in African politics isn't exactly news, but the sheer extent of it was staggering. An excellent and entertaining film overall. Story 8. To Shoot an Elephant. It should be on YouTube. The documentary starts out with an American showing the struggles of being farmer in occupied Gaza Strip. The filming began in October 2008. The documentary's plot changes 2 months later when Israel launches Operation Cast Lead. It then becomes a documentary about survival in the Gaza Strip during the operation. It shows the true horror of the conflict on the ground. It is especially relevant with Operation Protective Edge going on at the moment. Warning, it is NSFL and contains fairly graphic images. Story 9. Deliver Us from Evil. From Mubi, Amy Berg investigates the life of 30-year pedophile Father Oliver O'Grady and exposes the corruption inside the Catholic Church that allowed him to abuse countless children. Incredibly disturbing. Story 10. Up Series. It's a documentary that interviews 14 children starting at the age of 7, once every 7 years. The last documentary is from 2012 and the kids are now 56. It's frightening because you can see them from the start of their lives and hear what their hopes and aspirations were, and as they get older, how things changed. Truly frightening, but quite interesting. A very long series, 13 hours total, but well worth it. Story 11. Jeannie, The Secret of the Wild Child. It's about a girl who was locked away in her bedroom, literally chained up, all of her life and raised as if she was an animal in the 60s, I believe. She never learned to walk, speak, go to school, etc., and didn't know what it was like to feel loved. I studied the case in a sociology class. It brings up the whole nature versus nurture debate. Story 12. The Zeitgeist Trilogy 1, 2, and 3. The fact that these three combined only have 27 million views is astounding to me. It's a socially critical documentary about the world we live in today, and Peter Joseph, narrator and author, lays all the cards on the table. Who runs the world? What's happening behind the curtains? Where are we heading as a planet? And for what reasons? After seeing all three of them, it changed my life quite instantly. It's very hard not to believe what he's talking about, because, well, it's the truth and he isn't really shoving it down your throat. It's simply the facts that we have been ignoring up until now that we the people are starting to wake up. Story 13. Shark Water. It's a documentary about the dwindling shark population and how it's detrimental to human life. It shows some pretty gruesome, horrifying stuff. Also, The Cove. Don't watch either of these if you are prone to crying at innocent creatures being killed and tortured for no good reason. Story 14. King Corn. That movie sobered me about something serious. The best part is there was no judgment in it. It was a couple of guys with a small plot on which to grow corn. The rest of the documentary went on to explore how corn is used in various industries, namely corporate feedlots. You will rethink eating corn-fed beef after watching this. I do. Story 15. I remember watching some influenza documentaries with my step-granddad when I was a kid. We always sort of had trouble communicating, but I would always watch TV with him in silence, usually football. Anyways, one day when there wasn't a Cowboys game on, he just started watching this documentary on PBS or something about influenza, and I was legitimately terrified for a long while after. One day a bird fell out of the sky and landed, dead, in my backyard, and I thought that my entire family was messed because influenza was back. I still remember this little song that kids apparently used to sing back when influenza was big, something like I had a little bird and her name was Enza, I opened the window and flew Enza. Nightmare crap for a little 6-year-old kid. What documentary is complete nonsense? Story 1. Any monster hunting documentary. After a half hour of historical crap, there's an hour video of a bunch of guys in the woods gasping "what was that?" over and over. Spoiler, nothing happens. I wish that those monster hunting documentaries stopped trying to be 100% well, we found some evidence and just start CGIing the monster in. There was an Animal Planet show called Lost Tapes that did something like that, although they stated they were fake, and I loved/was scared of that show when I was a kid. You should be able to find some episodes on YouTube. Story 2. Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story. At first, it was interesting, but then it got a little too unbelievable. He literally recorded an alien in his kitchen. The point that made me laugh out loud was when he allegedly photographed a hybrid near his mailbox, and it was the clearest, detailed photo of an alien, and he says as he was going to his computer he tripped and deleted the photo. Story 3. The documentary White Wilderness by Disney, where they pushed lemmings of the cliff because they didn't want to believe the urban legend of them committing mass suicide was nothing but a myth. When it took too long, they went ahead with speeding up the process in order to get the shots they needed. It even won an Oscar. Story 4. Ancient Aliens. Great fun to watch, especially if you follow it up with Ancient Aliens Debunked. My roommate and I love this show because the leaps in logic are just amazing. Not only do they completely fabricate information to make their point, they create a false dilemma, then solve it with aliens. Nobody knows how they built this. Humans at the time did not have the technology to lift this rock. The only logical solution is aliens. At least once in episode 1 find myself in awe at the explanations they give. I also enjoy counting the times David Childress says some kind of to talk about alien tech. Story 5. Doctored, the film the AMA doesn't want you to see. My sister is deeply entrenched in chiropractic, and this is one of their main propaganda tools. The doc makes it seem like anyone even remotely involved in the medical or pharmaceutical industry is evil and has a secret agenda to make everyone sicker and take their money. I worked in pharmaceutical research. People care about other people. Some salespeople and doctors are unethical, but the majority just want to do something to help their fellow man. Story 6. I'm interested in severe weather, especially thunderstorms, supercells, tornadoes, lightnings. 95% of the recent tornado documentaries are made by attention whores who screen through the whole chase and show no science, explain nothing, just want to be as close as possible. The footage has to be as dramatic as possible. I don't care what you felt when filming, I'm interested in what and why happened on that very day. There are very few exceptions. Most of them were made a long time ago as public information films. Story 7. Back in the early 2000s, there was a documentary called Dark Side of the Moon. The premise is how documents were found proving Kubrick shot the Apollo 11 moon landing with the help of the CIA. The doc has a ton of known personalities discussing how they did it, including Donald Rumsfeld, Dr. Henry Kissinger, Buzz Aldrin, and Stanley Kubrick's widow, Christiane Kubrick. Long story short, the real premise of the film is how easy it is to manipulate footage to tell any story you want. General knowledge now, but it was more of a shock in the days before streaming video and more trusted information gateways. I stayed away from docs for a long time after that. Story 8. Treasures of the Wreck of the Unbelievable on Netflix. I made a post 2 months ago and said it was fake, and I was shot for not making it a spoiler. At the time it was listed as a documentary, but has since changed to mockumentary. The whole movie is about recovering treasure for a huge real art show in Venice, and the very last scene shows something like Mickey Mouse underwater. You had to Google just to find out it's fake, and it was the worst experience ever looking at it. Story 9. Unfortunately, while the Kony 2012 Invisible Children video was an accessible and horrifying portrayal of a real problem that exists to this day with child soldiers, the nonprofit also simplified the story significantly and forgot to mention that Kony is probably not anywhere near Uganda. The simple proposed solution isn't really a solution at all. Also, the head of the nonprofit had a problem. Story 10. Supersize Me doesn't make sense. The guy claims McDonald's makes him sick every time he eats it, but also says he is addicted to it after eating it a few times. He never released a log of what he ate, and the claims he makes for caloric intake doesn't match up with his rules of eating the entire menu and not supersizing when asked. The documentary Fathead has a guy eat fast food for a month and lose weight and points out the parts of Supersize Me that don't add up. Story 11. Supersize Me. A documentary about a guy called Morgan Spurlock who decided he was only going to eat nothing but McDonald's food for 30 days. By the end of the documentary, he claimed he had put on a lot of weight, had really high cholesterol, liver damage, and depression. A Swedish university tried to replicate the test on a bunch of students. By the end of the 30 days, none of the students had any of the cholesterol, liver problems, or depression Spurlock claimed to have gotten from eating nothing but McDonald's food. He also was found to have lied about intaking 5,000 calories each day. A Big Mac is around 500 calories, so to hit those numbers he would have to be eating around 5 Big Mac meals a day. Story 12. An Inconvenient Truth. I 100% believe in climate change, and I 100% believe that it's mostly human-caused, but that documentary was terrible. He got facts wrong, glossed over complicated science, made some unsupported statements, and used South Park clips for goodness sake. I've heard climate change deniers point to things Gore says that are wrong, then use his incorrect statements to try and discredit the entire idea of climate change. There's so many good documentaries out there about climate change. I hate that one of the worst ones became the most famous because Al Gore's name was attached to it. Story 13. Room 237, that Stanley Kubrick hid clues that he helped fake the moon landing in The Shining. To be fair, I think you can watch Room 237 as a fascinating documentary, not through the lens of any of the fan interpretations of Kubrick. I don't buy into any of them personally, but as a look at obsessive fandom in general and as relates to Kubrick specifically. It's wild to me that these people have all watched the same movie and come to such wildly different opinions about its meaning. Story 14. Bowling for Columbine is incredibly fake. Most, if not all, was incredibly misleading, while certain parts were outright fake. The scene where Michael Moore goes into the bank and received a free gun for opening an account was staged. The bank ran a special promotion in partnership with a local gun store where you open an account and receive a voucher, then go to the store and do a background check and waiting period to get the gun. Moore did all of this ahead of time and staged the shot to look like he was handed the gun in the bank. If you're ever bored and or hate Michael Moore, there's a documentary called Michael Moore Hates America that breaks down all of the nonsense in his movies. Story 15. The Brony one on Netflix was insulting. They spent the entire documentary talking about how MLP is for everyone and nobody should be ashamed and normal people watch it, and they spend the whole entire documentary following 3 people who are obviously on the spectrum. They had to choose 3 people to represent the Brony fandom and chose 2 autistic teens and a literal 4chan neck beard. Edit, he actually did live in his mother's basement. They could not have chosen a worse crowd to try to convince people that Bronies aren't weird. What's the most interesting documentary you've ever watched? Story 1. I love the Up series, which follows a group of British children from age 7 into adulthood, putting out updates every 7 years. 63 Up is the next installment, due in 2019. I sincerely hope they'll keep going when Michael Apted is no longer able to helm the project. It's groundbreaking in the documentary form, and just fascinating to see some of the ways class, sex, personality, and circumstances shape our lives. Also, Helvetica is truly great. Story 2. Searching for Sugarman, a documentary about a failed US rocker from the late 60s, early 70s. Whose debut album only sold 12 copies in the US unbeknownst to him. With the help of a couple of Swedish filmmakers who find him working at a Home Depot and living in extreme poverty in the mid-2000s, he learns that his failed album is actually the best-selling album ever in South Africa and that there he's bigger than the Beatles, giving him a second chance at rock stardom nearly 40 years later and half a world away. Story 3. There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. About a woman who seems like a supermom and ends up driving the wrong way on the freeway. Act her daughter and nieces. She also did something to 3 other people, a father, son, and family friend, from hitting their car head-on. For the longest time, I really thought they had an argument about some sort of tooth/bone infection causing crazy stuff, but in the end just... Nope. Lady cracked. What's terrifying is that not only did it seemingly come from nowhere, but to this date, her loved ones just can't seem to cope with the idea that she had any negligence. Story 4. The Queen of Versailles. About the wife of a mega-rich timeshare seller. At the beginning, they're building a huge mansion modeled on Versailles. As the documentary progresses, his businesses all go bust, and they start to atrophy staff, money, and property. She's from a poor background living in this insane trophy wife world, and somehow ends up being really likable. Although she does have a worrying number of taxidermy dead dogs. It's fascinating to watch the way the rich bratty kids react to the loss and fortune, and how she holds the crumbling family together. It's also camp as bad. Story 5. Heavy Metal Parking Lot, 1986. Heavy Metal Parking Lot is exactly what it sounds like. It was someone doing interviews with people outside a heavy metal concert in the parking lot. It was the year 1986 and the 80s were in full swing, full 80s cheese. The funny thing is a lot of the shirts they were wearing would fit in perfectly at Hot Topic today, which says a lot about both the 80s and Hot Topic. All I can say about HMPC is yes, it was really like that. The vulgarity, the freedom, the carelessness, the clothes. The teens of the 80s perfected wasted youth. Story 6. Ken Burns' PBS Vietnam War documentary on Netflix is phenomenal. Its production values are high, its soundtrack is some of the best rock you'll hear, and the doc is informative. They interviewed something like 100 people for the doc and it shows. A lot of the battles and skirmishes are talked about by the people who were on the ground at the time fighting. I'm 24 years old, so obviously I wasn't around during the time of the Vietnam War, but Ken Burns' doc seemed to be a well-rounded account of the conflict. Story 7. I just saw 3 identical strangers. What a ride. Ostensibly, it's about 3 triplets separated at birth, an interesting story in and of itself. But then it delves into the circumstances of that separation, and that's when crap gets compelling. My only complaint is that it desperately needs expansion and follow-up. It almost ended on a cliffhanger. Story 8. Evil Genius on Netflix. It's a documentary about digging into an abandoned, seemingly dead-end case about a man who robbed a bank with a bomb collar strapped around his neck. The man had a note on him with locations that have clues on where to find the key to unlock the collar. The police couldn't find who was guilty of forcing him into robbing a bank. Every suspect that the documentary meets adds more layers to the case and creates a web of crime stemming from one evil genius. Story 9. Century of the Self by Adam Curtis. It's 4 one-hour parts, all available on YouTube. It details how psychoanalytical thought and practice have been utilized by marketing firms and big business to tailor their products and commercials to influence consumers into buying more stuff they really don't need. The last episode also shows in part how Clinton's re-election campaign utilized some of these methods to win over voters. Highly recommend it, although it leaves you with a rather chilling impression of how people are manipulated in today's society. Story 10. Barkley Marathons. It's about a secret, not so secret anymore, race that happens in East TN. The entrance fee is whatever the race organizer needs that year. One year it was a white t-shirt, then socks, then flannel shirts. The race is essentially a 100-mile race that has to be completed in 24 hours, and the course is crazy hard with elevation changes. What makes it even harder is there is no course map. The way they know you did the entire race is they have books along the course, and you have to rip a page out and bring it back with you. Only 10 or so people have finished the race. Story 11. I usually find 30 for 30 super interesting. It's an ESPN doc series on different happenings in sports. I'm actually not a sports fan at all. I think my favorite thing I've seen is Survive and Advance. Not a documentary, but special mention to Hardcore History's Blueprint for Armageddon, a podcast series about WW1. It's the most interesting piece of nonfiction I've ever consumed. Can't recommend it enough. Story 12. Exit Through the Gift Shop. I love this one because with each rewatch I'm convinced this is Banksy trolling the art world by creating an alter ego to shill out awful generic commercial street art, and hiring someone so beyond eccentric and weird to play this character that it's believable. But I'm pretty sure the whole thing is Banksy's home movies of the scene set to a plot meant to insult the people who commercialize and buy into something like street art. Story 13. The Woman Who Wasn't There. It's about a woman who survived the World Trade Center attacks in an extremely dramatic fashion, yet lost her fiancé, who also worked in the towers, then went on to build an organization called the Survivors Network to help other survivors. Except she didn't. She became the most famous surviving person of the WTC attacks, but she wasn't even in New York. She never had a fiancé. She was possibly not even in the United States on September 11th. It's a wild ride. Story 14. The Red Pill, 2016, by Carrie J. It's the true story about a feminist, Carrie J in fact, who try to find the other side of the argument and go seek and interview people from the MRA, the men's right activist, and find they aren't the monster the feminist press try to force on them and just want to show the equality women don't want, and try to change all the things in the system that go against men, like the work injuries or guard of a child in a couple. It's a really great documentary and can change mind if people takes the time to watch it, and it's also great to lose all your friend when you explain to them the movie and just shut you with "yeah, but women make less than men, so you're wrong." 10 out of 10 would watch again. Story 15. You're Gonna Miss Me is a documentary about an acid casualty that was the frontman for a groundbreaking psychedelic band from the 60s. It centers around Roky Erickson, who suffers from schizophrenia and has to move back in with his family. The weird thing about this documentary, and I don't think it was on purpose, is it captures just how nuts his mom is and what an impact it's had on Roki and his siblings. There's an element of Munchausen by proxy. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.